Good morning and welcome to the fifth meeting of the Citizens' Participation and Public Petitions Committee of 2026. And indeed this may even be our penultimate meeting, depending on progress that's made with our legacy report at a subsequent gathering. And in view of that fact, I have to be honest and say that we are at a stage in the Parliament now where there is very, very little that this existing session of the Parliament can do, and we are really between a rock and a hard place in terms of our ability to take forward petitions any further. In some instances, we will close the petitions, not because we don't believe that the petitions are still substantive and with merit, but because if we keep them open and the new committee chooses to close them, there's then a 12-month embargo before the issue can be raised again. And it may very well suit the aims of the petitioner to be able to simply re-lodge the petition at the start of the next session, which allows that petition to be aired immediately by the new committee in that next session of Parliament. There are a handful of petitions that we will be minded to keep open, and the criteria we have to think about is whether the actual original asks and narrative of the petition are still current. If the petition's been open a long time and events have moved on and the original underpinning of the petition is somewhat dated, that's not helpful to it if it's kept open into the next Parliament, and a fresh petition bringing the narrative up to date would be better. In some instances, there are very clear areas of evidence that we've been exploring that still remain unresolved, and we would look to potentially keep those petitions open for the new committee to look at. But out of, I think, what were 120 petitions that were open at the start of the year, when I say a handful will be kept open, I mean between 6 and 10. So it's a very, very small list that we can bequeath to the subsequent Parliament that will be elected. Our first item really today, and our entire business today, is the consideration of continued petitions. And the first of those petitions is petition number 1887 to create an Unborn Victims of Violence Act, and this was lodged by Nicola Murray, and it calls on the Scottish Parliament to urge the Scottish Government to create an Unborn Victims of Violence Act, creating a specific offence that courts are enabled to hand down longer sentences for perpetrators of domestic violence which causes miscarriage. We last considered this petition on the 3rd of May 2023, where we agreed to seek a chamber debate on the issues raised in the petition, and that debate was in fact held on the 2nd of May 2024. Now, before we begin consideration of the petition this morning, members of the committee and those following this petition may be aware that since we last considered this petition and since that committee debate, the petitioner has herself been convicted of offences following a court case. With that being said, the ask of the petition remains an important one, and this morning the committee will decide what action it wishes to take in relation to the action called for in the petition. Since the committee debate, the Cabinet Secretary for Justice and Home Affairs has provided 2 written submissions to the committee. The first of those was in July 2024 and states that she's asked officials to progress discussions with justice partners to develop policy for how a statutory aggravator for causing miscarriage through acts of domestic abuse could operate. The submission also notes that the Scottish Sentencing Council is considering the issues raised in the petition insofar as they relate to sentencing in the context of the new draft guidelines that are being developed. The second written submission from the Cabinet Secretary states that the discussions have taken place with a focus on the potential to develop a statutory aggravator for causing miscarriage through acts of domestic abuse and how it could operate in practice. So progress on the aims of the petition, about which we heard some fairly disturbing evidence early in the lifetime of this Parliament. Do colleagues have any suggestions at this stage what we might now do? Mr Torrance.
Thank you, Convener. In light of evidence before us and the commitment from the Scottish Government, I wonder if we would consider closing the petition under Rule 15.7 of Standing Orders on the basis that the Scottish Government officials have been progressing discussions with justice partners to consider the potential development of a statutory aggravator for causing miscarriage through acts of domestic abuse and how it could operate in practice. And can I say to the petitioner, if this doesn't come and the new guidance is not, can they bring a new petition back to Parliament in the new session?
Thank you. Are colleagues content? We are. In order to facilitate a number of members of the gallery this morning, I'm going to reorder and move to petition number 2193. It's on page 28. Oh, no, it's on my page 28. It's on whose page, what number it is. Your petition number 2193, address dangerous delays in paediatric cancer diagnostics, which we heard just last month. This has been lodged by Avril Arnott, and it calls on the Scottish Parliament to urge the Scottish Government to introduce mandatory clinical standards to ensure that urgent paediatric cancer referrals are subject to the same maximum wait times as adult referrals, to require clear accountability and follow-up where a paediatric cancer referral is downgraded or delayed, to fund training and update guidelines to enable GPs and clinicians to recognise and escalate signs of cancer in children as promptly as they would in adult cases. And I think we heard some quite difficult evidence in relation to that, and undertake a formal review into paediatric diagnostic delays in Scotland to identify systemic failures and implement change. Now, as I said, we last considered this petition on the 21st of January, and we agreed to write then to the Scottish Government and the Royal College of Paediatrics and Child Health, and we asked for views specifically on the second point of the petition, that of requiring clear accountability and follow-up where a paediatric cancer referral is downgraded or delayed. Colleagues will remember that the petition was prompted by the tragic passing of Isla Snedden after she was repeatedly referred and downgraded in her medical assessments on account of her young age. In its response, the Royal College of Paediatrics and Child Health argues that missed opportunities for early intervention, which can lead to irreversible harm, are not only a service challenge, but a clear children's rights issue. It states that the UN Convention on the Rights of the Child makes timely, appropriate and accessible healthcare an obligation, not just an option. We did receive a comprehensive response from the Cabinet Secretary for Health and Social Care after a meeting he himself apparently held with Isla's parents. The response highlights that the Centre for Sustainable Delivery is currently reviewing supporting guidance for the Scottish Referral Guidelines, SRG, for suspected cancer. And this guidance clarifies that if a referral is regraded, then a communication should be sent to the referring clinician with explicit reasons for that regrading and consideration for the next steps in care. And colleagues will be aware of the introduction of Jessie's rule in NHS England, which encourages primary care clinicians to rethink a diagnosis if an individual presents 3 times with the same symptoms or concerns. And the Cabinet Secretary tells us that he has instructed his officials to liaise with the UK Department of Health and Social Care to explore how the rule is implemented in England and how a similar rule could be introduced into Scotland. The Cabinet Secretary's response also reminds us of actions the Scottish Government has taken in relation to some of the other issues raised by the petition, which I believe we were quite content to hear about last time. And these actions include updating the SRG for children and young people last summer and a primary care cancer education platform for primary care clinicians. We've also seen previously that the Scottish Government expects the Managed Service Network for Children and Young People with Cancer to initiate local board escalation procedures in cases of systemic issues. And finally, the Cabinet Secretary confirms that the clinically led review of the current cancer waiting time standards will specifically include paediatric and teenage and young adult cancers. So, insofar as we are able in this Parliament, I think that advances matters quite considerably. Jackie Bailey is with us this morning with an interest in this petition. Jackie, is there anything you would like to add to our consideration?
Just a couple of things, Convener, and can I also indicate that members of Isla's family have joined us today in the public gallery. You are quite correct, they met with the Cabinet Secretary for Health. I think it is fair for you to say that there has been considerable progress made, and I want to pay tribute to Isla's family for pursuing this. But it's not quite yet complete. And I know that the committee is keen to close petitions, but I feel I need to put on the record that what we have here is a number of reviews that will be ongoing. We don't yet have, final changes that mean that practice across Scotland in terms of the diagnosis of cancer for children and young people has changed. So it may well be that the family choose in the new Parliament, depending on what happens on the 7th of May, to bring back their petition to make sure that this is finally concluded. But I acknowledge the progress that's been made because of their campaigning and their interest in this issue. Thank you, Convener.
Thank you. And that there is the horns of the dilemma. I think the committee on which the committee rests. Is this a case of a petition we should keep open, or a petition that should be closed now but brought back in the new Parliament to actually take forward the monitoring of the actions that are allegedly being taken forward, and anything else that remains outstanding? I defer to colleagues. Do we have any suggestions? Mr. Golden, have you got any thoughts? Or
I mean, I think that it is a dilemma for the committee because the process hasn't concluded, and all we have to offer the petitioner from the Scottish Government is potential, a series of reviews and considerations which may yield the results the petitioner wants or may not, and therefore it's very difficult to see how we can adequately conclude on the basis of that. Nevertheless, I mean, I think that potentially the best outcome for the petitioner is to close the petition under Rule 15.7 of Standing Orders, and then allow the petitioner, if, heaven forbid, that these reviews do not yield the result, they would then be able to specifically come back with a petition targeted at the remaining asks. I sense that's probably the best way forward, rather than, because you would hope, Convener, that there would be some movement in terms of the various reviews and considerations going on.
thank you. Any colleagues got anything further they might like to add? Mr. Ewing.
I think the petitioner, ably assisted by Jackie Bailey throughout and others, have done a great thing in the circumstances which are absolutely tragic in respect of their daughter. And I think the fact that the Health Secretary has met Stebbins, has met the family, and has given the written submission just as recently as the 6th of February, and given a submission which is not only very detailed but does indicate that progress has been made both in dialogue with the UK about introducing a Jess's Law type thing, where someone presenting 3 times should be recognised and treated and not downgraded in the way that tragically happened in their daughter's case. And secondly, that there are 6 rapid cancer diagnostic services are being established. That progress, I wonder whether it would have happened had it not been for the petitioner's work and the deliberations of this committee. So I think that progress means that if the family and others wished to pursue a petition, the aims would be slightly different. It wouldn't be to start climbing the hill. It would be to get nearly to the summit, where they nearly now are, if you see what I mean. And therefore, the reframing of a petition in the new Parliament could focus on and acknowledge the progress that has been made, rather than fight that part of the battle which has already been won. And therefore, whilst I think Mr Golden is correct in that the petition can be closed today, it can be closed with honour and having had considerable success, and with sight of the summit, so that if in metaphorical terms, so that it would be simple, I think, if they were to be assisted by Ms Bailey, assuming for the moment that she's back with us in the next session of Parliament. And
wouldn't bet against it.
I wouldn't bet a penny on that either. So, for all those reasons, I think closing the petition is not a defeat. It is a victory for the petitioners, because they have achieved great things, and I hope that they can understand that with a couple of weeks to go, we are not practically going to be able to do anything else. But this has been a success by them, to which Scotland should be grateful.
Thank you very much, Mr Ewing. I think the whole committee can agree with that. And I think where there's still life in the Parliament ahead, we might have wanted to see a little bit more progress ourselves. But I think we would probably have come to the same end result. So I do want to thank the petitioners. I mean, and echo everything that Fergus Ewing has just said. I think progress has been made, and I think we can be pleased that that is the case. And I think that is entirely down to the pressure that has been brought not just through the raising of the petition, but by all the work associated in promoting the aims of it and the meeting with the Cabinet Secretary. And I take it colleagues, therefore, are agreed that we will close the petition at this point, in the expectation that focus will not be lost on the issue and it will come back to us in the new Parliament, reframed to ensure that those aims are actually met. Are colleagues content? We are. Thank you. I'm going to reorder again and bring us to petition number 2085. That's to introduce a statutory definition of residency for fatal accident inquiries into the deaths of Scots abroad. This petition has been lodged by David Cornock, and it calls on the Scottish Parliament to urge the Scottish Government to introduce a statutory definition for fatal accident inquiries into deaths abroad. We last considered this petition on the 12th of November 25, when we agreed to write to the Cabinet Secretary for Justice and Home Affairs, the Lord Advocate and the Chief Constable of Police Scotland. The Lord Advocate's response confirms that she has met with the petitioner, and as a result of that, a number of improvements to how relatives affected by deaths abroad are communicated with have been made. The Lord Advocate states that she does not consider that a formal lack of definition of ordinarily resident adversely affects the Crown's decision-making, and the submission states that whether the person was ordinarily resident in Scotland will be clear in most cases from the initial information provided. For example, where the person has been living and working abroad out with Scotland for many years, it's extremely unlikely that they would not be considered to have been ordinarily resident. If there is uncertainty about the residency status of the person who's died, the Crown Office will instruct further inquiries to obtain information that will allow a determination to be made. Now, the Lord Advocate also notes that a minute of agreement was finalised with the Death Certification Review Service and Police Scotland, which updated the process for reporting and investigating deaths abroad. The minute includes detailed guidance on the facts to be considered when assessing whether a person was ordinarily resident in Scotland at the time of their death, with reference to relevant case law. The Cabinet Secretary's response to the committee reiterates the Scottish Government's position that legislating a definition of ordinarily resident would not resolve the underlying challenges or improve outcomes for families. The Cabinet Secretary also states that she is aware of comparisons with the coroner system in England and Wales, but that it is important to note that the inquest system of England and Wales operates under a very different framework. While their processes differ, the Cabinet Secretary states that both jurisdictions face similar practical obstacles in investigating deaths abroad. The Deputy Chief Constable's submission states that the assessment of residency status is always an important one, and when Police Scotland is instructed to undertake further inquiries, they will seek to explore fully with the family in order to provide sufficient information to assist the determination. He also reiterates that Police Scotland's view is that the current definition of ordinarily resident is sufficient. Now, the petitioners provided a written submission arguing that the recent responses are ill-informed and dismissive to the 1,000 families affected by this issue. The petitioner reiterates concern that no FAIs into deaths abroad have taken place and believes that this proves the bar is impossibly high. And we've also received written submissions from Jackie Bailey and Michael Mara, MSPs, who have, Michael Mara, both previously addressed the committee on this petition. Ms Bailey's submission states that it is unthinkable that a parent should be left without options to establish why their child died in unexplained circumstances, even whilst abroad, when they are a UK citizen. Ms Bailey believes that Scotland appears to lag behind the system in England and Wales, and Michael Mara MSP's submission asks that the committee keep the petition open and highlights the petitioner's tireless campaigning in the issue. The committee has received unsolicited written submissions from two individuals, Mr Billy Milligan and Mr Dave Scott. Mr Milligan's submission states that the absence of a statutory definition has produced uncertainty, inconsistency and injustice. He asserts that this uncertainty is not an academic quibble, as it directly affects workers and families in Scotland's globally enlarged economy. And Mr Scott, who is an offshore energy industry representative, and expresses disappointment that this area of legislation regularly fails Scottish people. And finally, the committee has received an unsolicited written submission from Victim Support Scotland. The submission states that the support they can offer bereaved families relies entirely on strict referral processes and requires criminality to be confirmed by the relevant authority. This means that deaths occurring either in Scotland or abroad where no criminality has been found and which are unexplained, suspicious, by suicide or by road traffic accident do not form part of its remit or funding agreement. The submission notes and states that it would appear there is a gap in support, and therefore the onus is on families to investigate, challenge, query and understand complex international legislation, all at their own financial and time cost, while grappling with grief and trauma. Again, Jackie Bailey, is there anything you'd like to add beyond your written submission?
Just a couple of things, Convener, and thank you very much for giving me permission to speak. You'll know that this has been raised not just here, but also in the UK Parliament by Dave Dugan MP and now Douglas McAllister MP. It has truly been a cross-party effort in regard to this petition, and Mr Cornick has met with the Lord Advocate, as you rightly referenced, and indeed previously with the First Minister. Although you are right that the process has been helpful and it's led to changes, including the minute and guidance, it does require more than guidance. And if it's not legislative change, I'm yet to hear from the government what change will actually deliver the result that people want on a consistent basis. The reality is, as you yourself acknowledged, there have been no FAIs in Scotland since 2007 for unexplained deaths abroad, yet the contrast in England is that there's 1,700. This is not right. There's a gap in the law. I would argue, given the thousands of Scots who work abroad, that this is not over. This petition needs to carry on. It's a matter for the committee whether they continue it. I would urge you to do so, because the reality is loved ones, they need clarity, they need truth and justice in the event of an unexplained death abroad. And this committee has taken the trouble to make sure this petition is heard. I hope you will continue to keep it open, but if that's not the case, then please take this as notice that the petitioners will bring this back because it's unfinished business.
Thank you, Ms Bailey. And yeah, the petitioners had the opportunity to meet the Lord Advocate. The committee itself has not taken evidence orally from the Lord Advocate, only written evidence. And I think that the central... First of all, I think one of the things that became apparent to the committee as we investigated this is that the systems are wholly different in England, Wales and Scotland. It's actually not possible to compare them really at any stage along the line. They are quite different. They've got different aims and purposes. One relates to kind of post-mortems and the other is a different... It's not similar. I think that probably the committee has taken the residency issue insofar as the Crown Office and Police Scotland and others are concerned as far as we can. But I'd come back to the point that the petitioner makes that nothing's ever happened on behalf of anybody. And I think that is the issue that has continued to trouble the committee. Mr Ewing, have you got any thoughts on the matter?
Yes, I can see that the circumstances, again, are tragic for the petitioner and the shroud of mystery surrounding the death.
Who I should say is in the gallery, by the way.
Will linger forever, and that is a tragic circumstance. Obviously, the petitioner's real desire is to have had a proper, thorough inquiry investigation into this conducted by an independent judicial authority in Scotland. There are, I mean, it needn't be said, and I don't need to lecture the petitioner about this because it's on many occasions, but there are extreme evidential hurdles in any such work where something happens in another jurisdiction. And I understand from the evidence that normally, for there to be an investigation here, there needs to be the agreement of the host jurisdiction where the death occurred. Normally, that is the case as well. And I understand that Lord Cullen enabled the conduct of FAIs here, but said, and I think to the extreme anger of the petitioner, frankly, that these might happen rarely. These words were said to be doing an awful lot of heavy lifting. I think that was the petitioner's reflection. But I do think that what the petitioner may wish now is not really to focus, Convener, on the definition of ordinary residence. I think the response we've had has been quite clear from the Cabinet Secretary and the Lord Advocate and the police that this is reasonably well understood and settled. I think it's rather that the petitioner wants there to be the capability of having investigations here, and it may be that that is not hampered so much by the definition of ordinary residence, but by the fact that the processes in Scotland are so different. So I think perhaps, I don't know if Ms Bailey thinks this is a fair point. I'd be interested to hear if she thinks this is a fair point, because I am trying to pursue this fairly and rationally to the benefit of the petitioner. But it may well be that a petition could be reframed to focus on the desire to have a similar process as that which takes place in England under their post-mortem procedure, which, though different, may have offered a relief and remedy had it been applicable in Scotland, because I think that issue has not been fully examined and explored. So, in short, again, I think this is a case, as with the previous petition convener, where the petitioner has achieved clarity, focus of the sort that just would not have happened. There's not a shadow of a doubt about that. This clarity has only resulted because of the persistence and the determination and the guts of the petitioner, again assisted ably by Miss Bailey. I don't know what it is that Miss Bailey seems to get all the most tragic cases, but there we are. That's maybe a curious cephalogical fact.
In fairness, not assisted entirely by me. The petitioner has moved, I think, with great judgment from Dundee to Dumbarton, so he now is my constituent. But yeah, I think there's been other people involved, and it has been cross-party.
So, in conclusion, I think this again has been a success in many ways in achieving clarity, where previously there had been just a lack of consideration, I think, rather than a lack of clarity, but a lack of any consideration by the Parliament, by the Government. So I don't think in closing the petition it is a defeat, but it is not yet a victory. But it could be, and it should be, and it may be if it's brought back in the next Parliament. And I would hope that whoever is in this committee, the successors committee, and who knows, I would quite like to be here if the people say so, then that the knowledge and the corpus of work that has been done is a legacy of sorts, which exists. Whether or not the petition is closed is not really relevant. It exists because it is there for future members of the next committee and the next session. So I'm sorry I've taken a little bit of time, but it is an extremely important matter, and I would recommend that the petition is closed, but that the petitioner should be thanked again for his work in bringing to Parliament a matter of grave importance to all.
Thank you. Colleagues, on that basis of Mr Ewing's suggestion, are we agreed that that's the course of action best pursued?
Yep.
It is. Okay, so we do thank the petitioner and look to this petition being reframed, I hope, and coming back to the next session of Parliament. And I note in passing Mr Ewing's constitutional innovation of directly elected committee members by the wider public, which
why not
secure him his return. Petition number 1900 to access to prescribed medication for detainees in police custody. And this has been lodged by Kevin John Lawson. It calls on the Scottish Parliament to urge the Scottish Government to ensure that all detainees in police custody can access their prescribed medication, including methadone, in line with existing relevant operational procedures and guidance. We last considered this petition on the 14th of January 26, when we agreed to write to the Minister for Drugs and Alcohol Policy and Sport. And the Minister's response to the committee confirms that in November, the Scottish Government sent a survey to health boards. The survey gathered information on controlled drug licences for custody suites, and when all licences are renewed, whether policies ensure detainees can access all prescribed medication, whether adverse events, complaints and feedback are constantly recorded, and where gaps exist, and what plans and timescales are in place to achieve full compliance. Now, the vast majority of boards hold the required controlled drug licences for police custody suites and have stable governance arrangements in place. 3 health boards reported delays in licence renewals due to Home Office processing times. However, continuation letters or formal acknowledgements ensured services could continue safely in the meantime. The submission states that NHS Grampian patients there on a methadone prescription that can be confirmed by their pharmacy and community prescriber will be administered methadone within the first 48 hours following clinical assessment and decision-making. Currently, methadone can only be administered at Kitty Brewster Custody Suite. NHS Grampian have now been able to identify further community pharmacies within Grampian that will support the delivery of Schedule 2 medicines to allow opioid replacement therapy for patients A working group is progressing this work, and it is expected that progress to roll this out across Elgin and Fraserburgh will now happen at pace. For any patients where a prescription cannot be confirmed and they are actively in withdrawal while in police custody, they will be assessed and given dihydrocodone to alleviate withdrawal symptoms. To ensure robust and consistent monitoring, the Scottish Government will request an update from all health boards each November as part of an annual review process, and the Scottish Government will also seek updates to confirm the completion of the rollout of the opioid replacement therapy pathway across NHS Grampian. The petitioner's written submission states that detainees are not given the legal requirement of informed consent, which he states is a legal right and not a privilege. He notes his ongoing concern that NHS Grampian has been providing dihydrocodone to detainees in police custody without their explicit informed consent. Do your colleagues have any suggestions as to how we might proceed? Mr Torrance.
Thank you, Convener. In light of the actions by the Government, I wonder if we consider closing the petition under Rule 15.7 of Standing Orders on the basis that the Committee has progressed the issue raised in the petition as far as it reasonably can in the Parliament session. The Scottish Government conducted a rapid review, with a majority of health boards taking an appropriate action to meet the required standards. And the Scottish Government completed a survey of all health boards in 2025 to gather information on the administration of prescribed medication. And the Scottish Government will review health board compliance with requirements to provide prescribed medication to detainees in police custody on an annual basis.
Colleagues, are we content? We will. Good progress having been made during the course of the Parliament in relation to that. This petition and similar, I recall us actually seeing specific changes made to the way in which drugs are issued in police custody.
It's a very substantial process, so I remain disappointed that Grampian haven't engaged more actively with the committee, and I think the petitioner has made that view known quite frequently and very fairly.
Okay, but we are agreed. We are. Petition number 1979 to establish an independent inquiry and an independent national whistleblowing officer to investigate concerns about the alleged mishandling of child safeguarding inquiries by public bodies. This has been lodged by Neil McLennan, Christine Scott, Alison Dickey and Bill Cook. The petition calls on the Scottish Parliament to urge the Scottish Government to launch an independent inquiry to examine concerns that allegations about child protection, child abuse, safeguarding and children's rights have been mishandled by public bodies, including local authorities and the General Teaching Council of Scotland, the GTCS. Gaps in the Scottish Child Abuse Inquiry and establish an independent national whistleblowing officer for education and children's services in Scotland to handle these inquiries in the future. And we last considered this petition on the 8th of October 25, where we agreed to write to the Scottish Government. The Scottish Government reiterates its position that there are already a set of processes and bodies in place in Scotland, including the Care Inspectorate and the Scottish Public Services Ombudsman, to provide independent inspections and investigations into specific incidents. This response also restates that the Government is progressing work to understand complaints and whistleblowing processes more widely, including via the National Public Protection Leadership Group and the Education and Childcare Assurance Board. Members may recall that the Professional Standards Authority has reviewed the General Teaching Council Scotland's fitness to teach process and it made a number of recommendations. The GTCS has now published an action plan to implement these over the short, medium and long term. The Scottish Government also states that when new concerns regarding individual cases emerge, these must be reported to the appropriate authorities, particularly Police Scotland, in order that they're properly investigated. Now, we've received an additional submission from the petitioners, who continue to highlight concerns that the National Child Protection Guidance is only advisory and that power is placed in the hands of local authorities. Petitioners feel that the improvements cited by the Government do not go far enough to address the issues raised. And I'll remind members that the Minister previously indicated that the Government would engage with the recommendations of the Scottish Child Abuse Inquiry once that is concluded, and that it will keep under review the statutory requirement for mandatory reporting. We also heard previously that a local authority-led process will always be required when investigating concerns, so long as local authorities provide education services and employ teachers in Scotland. Colleagues, the Scottish Government insists that a number of established processes and bodies, such as the Care Inspectorate and Police Scottish Public Services Ombudsman already provide independent inspections and investigations. The GTSCS has published its action plan to implement the recommendations of the PSA report. The Scottish Government continues to look at how existing whistleblowing arrangements are working. There are various pieces of work in progress which will inform further reviews of child safeguarding processes, and the Scottish Government has urged that new concerns regarding individual safeguarding cases should be reported to the appropriate authorities, including Police Scotland. Notwithstanding all of that, I think this is a very live issue and one of huge and immense public interest, and I'm minded to suggest to the committee that this is a petition that we continue to leave open and offer in our legacy report to our successor committee in order that they can take these matters forward, because I believe the underpinning of the issues that has been raised remains current. Any colleagues have any comments? Mr Ewing?
Yes, I absolutely agree with that, Convener, and note the petition was lodged in November 22, so it's 3¼ years old. That's been ample time for the Scottish Government as the main body here to have an inquiry, independent inquiry, and an independent national whistleblowing officer to investigate concerns about mishandling of child safeguarding inquiries. And on a wider note, we've so many examples in this session of Parliament that we've seen about whistleblowers being not just ignored, but pursued, harassed, even having their emails investigated. In the case, I believe, of the Queen Elizabeth Hospital whistleblowers. I know that that's not specifically the same thing about child safeguarding, but it is sort of the same theme. And also, we have had a variety of MSPs express concern, Ed Mountain, I think, and Ash Regan in previous concerns. So this issue is very much current, and it hasn't been dealt with. And the responses really so far could be summarised by saying the public sector is marking its own homework in Scotland. It's marking its own jotters. No use to refer to the Ombudsman, because the Ombudsman is a toothless tiger. I mean, by its own admission, it has really very limited powers to remedy anything. Actually, it has got some powers to award some financial recompense, but I'm not aware that those powers have ever even been exercised. So, effectively, that's useless and almost a waste of time, and it's no disrespect to the Ombudsman. It's the statutory framework which makes it thus, and will leave any complainant with a valid complaint feeling bitter, resentful, and having undergone a complete waste of time. So, for all these reasons, I think this is a very live issue. It hasn't been dealt with in any meaningful way by the government. It must be dealt with, otherwise the government and Parliament are failing the people in Scotland. And for those reasons, I very much support this petition remaining open and being rigorously pursued by our successor committee.
Other colleagues have any comments? Are we content then to add this to the short list of petitions that we will hold open to the next petition of Parliament? We are. Petition number 2028 to extend the concessionary bus travel scheme to include people seeking asylum in Scotland. This next petition has been lodged by Pinar Aksu on behalf of Maryhill Integration Network and Doa Abumar on behalf of the Voices Network. Both of whom I think joined us at earlier sessions of the Parliament. The petition calls on the Scottish Parliament to urge the Scottish Government to extend the current concessionary travel scheme to include all people seeking asylum in Scotland regardless of age. And we last considered this petition on the 12th of November 2025, where we agreed to write to the Minister for Agriculture and Connectivity. The Minister's response confirms that a non-statutory pilot commenced on the 1st of December 25 and is expected to run until the 31st of next month, or earlier if funding is exhausted. The pilot offers free bus travel to people seeking asylum who are not eligible for the existing national concessionary travel schemes. The Scottish Government expects future decisions to be informed by an evaluation of the pilot to take into account future affordability and value for money, and to determine if it has supported people seeking asylum to integrate into society. Now, just a few weeks ago, our colleague Paul Sweeney MSP asked the Scottish Government whether this pilot scheme will be extended. The Minister reiterated that it will run until the end of March, March. The Minister also explained, as the committee has in fact seen previously, that asylum seekers in Scotland can already access the statutory national concessionary travel schemes if they meet the eligibility criteria of being aged under 22, aged 60 or over, and have an eligible disability. So I think, again, progress has been made on this petition. Do colleagues have any suggestions to how we might proceed? Mr. Russell.
In light of the moves that the Scottish Government have made, I suggest we close the petition under Rule 15.7 of Standing Orders on the basis that certain categories of asylum seekers are already eligible to access the statutory national concessionary travel scheme. And the Scottish Government has suggested that any long-term actions to extend this scheme to all asylum seekers will depend on evaluation of the pilot currently underway. In closing the petition, the committee could write to the Minister for Agriculture and Connectivity and highlight its concerns regarding the lack of clarity for concessionary travel being available to all asylum seekers beyond March 26. The committee could also highlight the option for the petitioners to submit an updated petition in the next parliamentary session should they consider that the Scottish Government actions in this matter are not sufficient.
Mr. Russell, are colleagues minded to accept Mr. Russell's recommendation to close the petition? Again, with progress having been made by the committee during the course of this Parliament, and we are. Petition number 2113 to provide support to RAC-affected communities, lodged by Wilson and Hannah Chowdhury, calling on the Scottish Government to provide support to communities affected by reinforced autoclaved aerated concrete, commonly referred to as RAC, by setting up a national fund to assist struggling homeowners and tenants affected by RAC, initiating a public inquiry to investigate the practices of councils and housing associations concerning RAC, including investigation of how business related to RAC was conducted, the handling of safety reports and property sales, disclosure of RAC and responses to homeowner concerns. Introducing or updating legislation similar to the General Product Safety Regulations to ensure developers, councils and housing associations are held accountable for using substandard property materials, mandate risk disclosure and make surveyors and solicitors liable for untraced defects. Legislation should also include provision for a comprehensive register of high-risk buildings in Scotland. And we last considered this petition on the 24th of September 25 and at that time agreed to write to the Secretary of State for Scotland and the Cabinet Secretary for Housing. The position expressed by the Secretary of State for Scotland is that RAC issues in Scotland are a devolved matter and that the problem should be tackled by using the overall funding settlement received by the Scottish Government. The Cabinet Secretary of Housing indicates that the Scottish Government has been repeatedly engaging with the UK Government to stress the need for UK Government-led financial arrangements for RAC remediation on a cross-UK basis. Such calls have so far been unsuccessful, as appears to be the case with the Secretary of State's response. However, the Scottish Government's position continues to be that it is a UK Government responsibility, as many of the properties were sold under UK right to buy legislation, and the solution engages several reserved issues, including insurance, tax and consumer protection. Additionally, the Scottish Government argues that only the UK Government has sufficient financial flexibility to meet the costs of RAC remediation. The Cabinet Secretary points out to a number of initiatives and actions to engage with local authorities and communities in this issue and to monitor local authorities' own engagement and interaction with affected residents. The Scottish Government also asked for guidance to be produced in relation to the presence of RAC in roof construction in residential properties. Last month, the Institution of Structural Engineers published updated guidance which aims to support the appraisal, assessment and remediation of RAC roofs in Scottish residential properties. In providing evidence to the Local Government Housing and Planning Committee, the Cabinet Secretary explained that the Scottish Government agreed to a request made by Aberdeen City Council to repurpose some of its unspent funds available through the housing infrastructure to support RAC remediation. The Cabinet Secretary stressed that this was neither a government offer nor additional government money, but she expressed the Government's openness to consider similar proposals from other local authorities. And finally, members will recall that organisations such as the Royal Institution of Chartered Surveyors, the Royal Incorporation of Architects in Scotland and the Built Environment Forum Scotland have previously suggested that they were not supportive of a public inquiry. They argued that it would be both time and resource intensive, that it would divert from an immediate response, and that it may simply confirm what in fact is already widely known. Do members have any comments or suggestions for action? Mr Torrance.
Thank you, Convener. In light of the evidence, I don't think we could take this petition any further. And I would like to close the petition under Rule 15.7 of Standard Orders on the basis that the Scottish Government insists that it does not have the financial flexibility to set up a central remediation fund for RAC, and that it should be the UK Government to introduce a UK-wide fund. The Scottish Government has indicated that it will consider plans and proposals for flexible use of budgets by local authorities to support RAC-affected residents, and the Scottish Government has supported the development of RAC's Scottish Residential Property Guidance, which was published earlier this year, and stakeholders have highlighted that a public inquiry could be either problematic or unnecessary.
Colleagues, are we content? We are. So we close that petition. Issues of substance to those affected, but for the reasons that Mr Torrance has said, not something, unfortunately, that we're able to take any further forward. But it'll be interesting to see what progress is made, and in the light of that, whether there are fresh issues that could be pursued in the next Parliament. Petition number 2118 to review and restructure Scotland's flood risk management approach and operations, lodged by Tobias Christie on behalf of Speymouth Environmental Partnership. The petition calls on the Scottish Parliament to urge the Scottish Government to review the Flood Risk Management Scotland Act 2009 and improve flood alleviation and management processes by appointing an independent panel of engineers, economists and geomorphologists to support the design of flood risk management plans. We last considered this petition on the 24th of September 25, and we then agreed to write to the Cabinet Secretary for Climate Action and Energy and the Scottish Environment Protection Agency, SEPA. We received substantial responses from both the Cabinet Secretary and SEPA, which cover the various monitoring and engagement mechanisms used, and also include a breakdown of the specific engagement between SEPA and the petitioner over the course of a few years. SEPA also sets out a detailed response to the petitioner's concerns regarding SEPA's role in a number of flood prevention actions, the accuracy of its flood maps, the engagement of communities and its approach to future flood risk in Scotland. Both the Scottish Government and SEPA have reiterated that it is the responsibility of local authorities to develop and build flood protection schemes. Colleagues may remember from previous evidence that the Scottish Government's National Flood Resilience Strategy indicates that a flood advisory service will be established to provide the framework and process for flood protection schemes and for supporting communities. As members will also know from the Cabinet Secretary's response, SEPA develops flood risk management strategies and plans every 6 years. For these to be implemented by local authorities, Scottish ministers review, approve and monitor these plans. SEPA is currently consulting on flooding issues and priorities within potentially vulnerable areas, that's actually a formal term, potentially vulnerable areas, to inform the development of the 28 to 34 flood risk management plans. This consultation will close on the 26th of April. I wonder if colleagues have any suggestions for action. I should say, wearing my own constituency hat, that these flood maps that SEPA are looking to currently in their forecasting use a different matrix to any other agency elsewhere in the world. And this Parliament, believe it or not, is one of the few buildings SEPA don't think will be underwater in early course. So I do think I've had constituents who've been finding it difficult to get domestic insurance because insurance companies apparently are looking to these flood list plans, albeit SEPA advised me that they specifically say they shouldn't be used for that purpose. Notwithstanding that little vignette, do colleagues have any suggestions as to how we might proceed? Mr Goldham.
Thank you, Convener. It feels like we, as a committee, haven't got to the bottom of this, but I think that relies on the central point that there are so many different responsibilities split across different agencies and indeed government at times. So, for example, you have SEPA, you have the Scottish Government's National Flood Resilience Strategy, you have local authorities, of which there could be several along a riparian basin. And I think the nub of the petition is that the petitioner would like responsibility and accountability to someone in terms of flood risk management, and that isn't an approach that we have in Scotland. I potentially think that's a problem, and I've seen it in the North East, where there's communities want support and everyone blames someone else. Nonetheless, while I'm loath to close the petition, I'm struggling to think of anything that this committee could reasonably do, given the substantive nature of the ask and given the comprehensive responses from the Scottish Government. So I feel it might be for the petitioner to go back, review, resubmit, unfortunately, and therefore I think the committee has no choice but to close the petition under Rule 15.7 of Standing Orders.
Thank you, Mr. Golden. I thought you were going to be getting a face mask and snorkel on there to go and do some.
I was reminiscing about working for the Murray-Darling River Basin Commission 20 years ago. That's another story, convener.
Notwithstanding which, Mr. Russell?
Yes. It actually is quite a complex matter, notwithstanding the local authorities, Scottish Water and SEPA. There's other agencies involved as well, where it be planning authorities, different things, and that had quite a big involvement in Glasgow's, and obviously overlaps like the Brockburn and the Cart originate in the hills of East Renfrewshire, which is your constituency, but
the water will be much purer for that.
Yes. But there are reasonable flood risk management plans there, but because in recent years there have been much more rain, they're a bit out of date now. You know, that's the real crux of the matter here. They were probably just about fit for purpose, but things have, the weather's slightly changed now, and where once before it was like once in 100 years floods, you know, they've come down to like 1 in 30. Some are actually more frequent than that, you know. So it's quite a big exercise, but just to bear in mind that I think it needs to be focused rather than a broad approach here.
Thank you, Mr. Russell, and for bringing my constituency into these matters. My own domestic property, in fact, borders the River Cart, and although I wasn't the resident at the time, it used to regularly flood 50% of the garden until the magnificently led at that time Conservative Eastwood local authority was responsible for flood mitigations, which mean that it's never flooded since, despite the weather. My garden hasn't flooded since.
That was the £10 million I spent upgrading the lower downstream.
Well, we can discuss these matters further over a game of Monopoly, I think, Mr. Russell. But nonetheless, gosh, Mr. Ewing, now you normally have something to contribute to these matters.
I don't want to be left out of this particular party, but I have to say, in my constituency, I've had nothing but woe in dealing with SEPA, including trying to establish development of around over 20 affordable homes on a site which was essentially higher up than existing housing which has never been flooded, and yet they said there was a flood risk.
Yeah. And that is definitely an issue that I'm now finding.
I think they produce maps in accordance with such a precautionary level of risk that, you know, the whole of Scotland might as well be shown as a flood risk, apart from perhaps Ben Nevis, where the affordable housing opportunities are somewhat limited. So it took about 10 years of heart-rending struggle from a local builder who could have built luxury houses and sold them off, made a big profit, but because he put an application, and permission for these luxury houses in exactly the same area, and then he was denied permission for affordable housing later, and it was only because of his persistence and a favourable decision from Mr. McKean that we've got these affordable houses, and it's very, very hard in rural Scotland to find anywhere that you can build affordable houses.
I do actually think, Mr Ewing, I would commend to all members of this Parliament that they should consult the SEPA flood risk projections for their own constituencies, because I think they will, when they see them, be shocked.
Yeah.
Because they are really quite dramatic. And as you identify, because it's the same in my own constituency too, there are sites on quite elevated plains at the present time that are finding it difficult to proceed because of these long-term forecasts, which, as I said at the start, appear to be addressed by based on criteria that no other country has sought to adopt. And potentially, I think a lot of members are unaware of this, and I think they'll become increasingly so in the next Parliament.
It's very hard to prize them from their offices. I mean, most of the work is desktop.
Yeah.
And when you say to them, for a constituent, would you please come and meet the constituent, come and see the site, more often than not, there's either a refusal or a truculent agreement. And this is a plain lack of leadership from the Chief Executive and the Chair, both of whom are extremely well remunerated. So it would be nice to see if they could have a new policy of coming out of their offices to actually meet the people who pay for their wages from time to time.
Well, on notwithstanding that extracurricular discussion that we've managed to introduce, we do have a recommendation in relation to the petition that's before us from Mr Golden, which is at this stage to close it. But I think, mindful of the fact that there are issues here that need to be explored before long. Are colleagues content? We are. Petition number 2130, to make it illegal to remove all the hair from a horse's tail. This has been lodged by James Mackey, and it calls on the Parliament to urge the Scottish Government to introduce a ban on the removal of all hair from a horse's tail to leave a bare stump, other than for medical reasons. Last considered on November the 25th, and we agreed then to write to the Minister for Agriculture and Connectivity. The Minister informs us that following discussions with stakeholders, it has been agreed that the existing equine code be replaced with equine guidance, which does not require parliamentary approval and is therefore easier to keep updated. The aim is for this guidance to be published by March. The Minister states that the practice of removing the hair from a horse's tail will be addressed in the guidance, but he confirms that the Government has no plans to legislate to prohibit the practice. In an additional submission, the petitioner expresses concerns that draft guidance has not been published yet, and that it remains unclear what protection the Scottish Government does intend to provide for horses. Do members have any comments or suggestions for action? Mr Torrance.
Thank you, Convener. I wonder if we could consider closing the petition under Rule 15.7 of Standard Orders on the basis that the Government has no plans to legislate for a ban asked for by a petition, and it intends to replace the equine code with equine guidance by March this year. Can I say to a petitioner, if that guidance has not been brought forward, that they consider bringing a new petition to the next session of Parliament?
Yeah, I mean, the proof of the pudding is going to be in the eating, and we'll be eating it very soon. So we will be able to see whether that's the case, and if it's not, then I would very much recommend a fresh petition be lodged when Parliament reassembles. Are we content? We are. Petition number 2161 to extend the time period for complaints through the Scottish Public Services Ombudsman for neurodivergent people to 2 years. This has been lodged by Ivor Roderick Bissett. The petition calls on the Scottish Parliament to urge the Scottish Government to amend the Scottish Public Services Ombudsman Act 2002 to allow for a 2-year complaints period for people with cognitive disabilities. And we last considered this on the 10th of September when we agreed to write to the Scottish Public Services Ombudsman. The SPSO's response to the committee explains that the complaints form asks complainants when the problem happened and the reason for any delay in submitting the complaint. If a decision is made not to grant an extension, an internal review can be requested. The response also notes that detailed guidance about the application of the time limit is available for complaint reviewers and is reviewed regularly. At the time of writing, the SPSO was piloting a revised version of the time bar guidance and tool. The SPSO's response states that it does not keep a log of how many times it has allowed an extension to the time limit. The SPSO's view is that a single discretionary test for a specific group of users would create a two-tiered system. and may result in a new requirement for complainants to provide evidence or divulge a specific diagnosis to meet the criteria. Rhoda Grant, MSP, has provided a written submission to record her disappointment with the SPSO's response. In the submission, she states that despite statutory obligations, the Ombudsman Office appears to maintain a pattern of inflexibility that effectively discriminates against neurodivergent individuals. And Ms Grant points out that the Ombudsman's own missed deadlines carry no penalty, while service users are excluded by rigid timelines. And can I just, in passing, since Rhoda Grant is standing down at the end of this Parliament, thank her for her contributions to the work of this committee. She has been an assiduous supporter of many petitions during the lifetime of this particular Parliament. The petitioner has also provided a written submission in which he questions whether the extension policy is real, measurable and accessible, or merely theoretical. And he states that the SPSO's response does not provide evidence capable of answering this question. He argues that a policy which never results in accommodation is not a reasonable adjustment. The submission points out that the SPSO's response relies on broad assurances but provides no verifiable data to support its claims, and the petitioner states that the absence of data prevents parliamentary scrutiny. And the petitioner states that the internal nature of the review process means that appeals lack meaningful independence. Well, I'm spectacularly unsatisfied with all of that. Mr Torrance?
Thank you, conveners. Somebody who usually shuts petition down, I would like to recommend to a committee that we keep this petition open, as there are several areas that I feel are justified for exploring in the new session by the new committee. I wonder if we can keep it open and put it into a legacy report, so we could take it forward with whoever's on the next committee in the next session, that they can explore these issues.
Okay, so we are looking on this instance to keep this petition open. Does any colleague anything? Are we content with that? Mr Ewing?
I do concur with what you said and what Mr Torrance said, and find the bureaucratic approach almost comical in its absurd complexity and the complete failure to exercise any discretion in favour of people who plainly merit it, as supported, as Rhoda Grant points out, by a Citizens Advice Bureau, specialist autism advocates and formal medical certification. Despite all that, the lack of discretion seems to me to be quite perverse, and just everything that's wrong about bureaucracy. And I don't know if the Scottish Ombudsman pays any regard to anything that is said here or not, but I do very much think that this is just not right. They are paid for by the public. They need to serve the public. They need to be sympathetic to the public. That's what they're there for. That's what they were set up for, not to engage in endless navel-gazing about exploring possible means of possibly reporting a statistical outcome to the Parliament. I mean, what pettifogging nonsense. So why doesn't the Chief Executive get a grip of that organisation and start to serve the public better? I hope that's fairly clear, Convener.
Well, I understood it, certainly, Mr Ewing, and I think colleagues are in agreement with the sentiment expressed. Mr Torrance has put a proposal to us that this be one of the petitions we add to our short list of petitions that the future committee can consider. Are we agreed? We are. Petition number 2165, to raise awareness of and provide educational resources and training for functional neurological disorder, FND. This has been lodged by Michelle Moyer. The petition calls on the Scottish Parliament to urge the Scottish Government to help improve awareness of functional neurological disorder, FND, by providing funding for training and educational resources for medical professionals, including GPs, paramedics, call handlers, employers and wider society on the symptoms and impacts of FND. We last considered this petition on September the 24th last year, when we agreed to write to the Minister for Public Health and Women's Health. The Minister's response methodically answers the additional questions posed by the petitioner. She reiterates that there are a number of projects currently underway which are relevant to the petition asked, including the FND Care Pathway, which I remember some colleagues welcomed when we last considered this petition. The Minister explains that ultimately it is the responsibility of NHS boards to plan and deliver services at a local level, including for FND, and that boards have a statutory duty to involve people and communities in such decisions. In terms of disseminating information, the Minister explains that despite statutory obligations, the Ombudsman Office appears to maintain a pattern of inflexibility that effectively discriminates against neurodivergent individuals. I think I've got my notes mixed up. I do apologise. I'll start that sentence again. The Minister explains that the responsibility to refer people with FND to the appropriate resources falls on clinicians. The petitioner came back with further additional questions for the Minister, although I would tentatively suggest that in this case there may not be much else, notwithstanding the questions, which I thought were perfectly reasonable, that the committee could pursue in terms of the substantive ask of the petition. So in light of the FND care pathway having been set up, I'm not sure what your colleagues think in this instance. Mr. Torrance.
Convener, thank you. I think progress has been made on the petition, so I wonder if the committee, and with the time it's left to the committee, which is limited, I wonder if the committee would consider closing the petition under Rule 15.7 of Standing Orders on the basis that the Scottish Government has funded the FND care pathway and has suggested that several other measures have been or are being taken to improve awareness of FND. NH boards are responsible for planning and delivering services locally and have a duty to involve communities in decisions regarding service delivery, and individual clinicians are responsible for referring people with FND to appropriate resources.
Colleagues, are we content? Well, I mean, in this instance, I mean, I think that, we now have the pathway. Whether that is adequate will again be something of which we will be able to establish, and I would have thought, understand, and whether it's effectively resourced and implemented as well. In the light of whatever that practice proves to be, I think there may well be merit in a fresh petition arising from whatever that experience is in the next Parliament. And I think we might write to the petitioner, actually I think the petitioner might be with us, but to write to the petitioner advocating that we look, that they look to see whether that has addressed anything. If not, then perhaps the next Parliament could re-examine this on that basis. But the current petition asks for something which I think any immediate new committee might feel what they couldn't advance. And as I said at the start of the meeting, close and therefore bar any further discussion of the matter for a full year, which I think might not be desirable. Mr Torrance has made a recommendation. Are colleagues content? Petition number 2170 to abolish the General Teaching Council for Scotland, lodged by Paul Blaker on behalf of Accountability Scotland. The petition calls on the Scottish Parliament to urge the Scottish Government to abolish the GTC for Scotland and replace it with a government agency. We last considered this petition on the 8th of October when we agreed to write to the Scottish Government. The Scottish Government maintains that as far as the regulatory role of GTCS is concerned, it believes the Council to be effective. It therefore reiterates it's got no plans whatsoever to abolish it, as it would be neither desirable nor proportionate. In terms of petitioners' concerns about the coordination between the Government and GTCS, the Government position is that policy officials maintain regular contact with the GTCS as part of their ongoing responsibilities to ensure that any responses are informed and accurate. Members will remember that the GTCS previously commissioned the Professional Standards Authority to undertake an independent review into the performance and efficiency of its fitness to teach process. The GTCS has now published an action plan to implement the PSA's recommendations. The planned actions range from short to long term. During the next 2 years, updated fitness to teach rules will be developed with a view to publish these by spring 2028. The Scottish Government has indicated that while it will stay in close communication with GTCS during the implementation of the PSA recommendations, it is ultimately for the organisation to take forward the required improvement work. The petitioner remains concerned that the Scottish Government's position does not provide sufficient clarity and reassurance, and that it does not address the wider questions regarding systemic failure. Colleagues, do we have any suggestions as to how we might proceed? Mr Torrance.
Thank you, Convener. In light of evidence to committee, I wonder if we consider closing the petition under Rule 15.7 of Standing Orders on the basis that the Scottish Government's position is that abolishing the GTCS is neither desirable nor proportionate. The GTS has published its action plan to implement recommendations of the Professional Standards Authority report, including a range of short, medium and long-term measures, and the GTCS expects to consult on updated fitness to teach rules with a view to publish these in spring 2028.
Thank you, Mr Torrance. Do colleagues have any comments, or are we content to accept the recommendation? We are. Petition number 2173, ban ultra-processed foods in school meals, lodged by Lauren Houston, calling on the Scottish Parliament to urge the Scottish Government to ban the use of ultra-processed food in school meals across Scotland in order to give our children healthier options. Last considered on the 8th of October 25, and at that point we agreed to write to the Scottish Government and relevant school meal providers. The Scottish Government's response to the petition states that while there is no universally agreed definition of ultra-processed foods, they can broadly be defined as foods containing many ingredients used in the industrial production process. And while the term ultra-processed may include products commonly high in fat, salt and sugar, such as sweet and savoury prepackaged snacks and soft drinks, it also includes products which are fortified with vitamins and minerals and have nutritionally beneficial components such as fibre, including bread and yogurts. The Scottish Government states that it does not use a single definition of fresh, as this will depend on the context, and nor does it collect data on fresh provision. Instead, the nutritional requirements for food and drink in Schools Scotland Regulations 2020 focus on the nutritional value of school food, drink and meals to support the healthy growth and development of children. For example, some local authorities cook the main component of a meal at a central location, freeze and transport for reheating at several local school locations, and serve alongside fruit, vegetables and salad prepared at each site. Sounds lovely. As such, while the meat as a whole delivers the desired amount of energy and key nutrients, it would be difficult to determine whether that meal would be deemed fresh. Well, for others, while the whole meal might be cooked on site daily, it could include frozen vegetables which deliver high nutritional value, but may or may not be considered as fresh. Well, they're not, they're frozen, as vegetables have been cooked hours before and kept warm until service. Compliance with food regulations is monitored by His Majesty's Inspectorate for Education, Health and Nutrition Inspectors as part of the annual school inspection programme. Well, it all seems to have become more complicated than those terms once used to be. But Mr Golden, you're the committee member with most recent experience of having been at school. I just wonder if you have any comments.
True. I think the Scottish Government's response is deeply inadequate, if I'm honest. I think what they have determined is that there's a series of definitions that they are seeking to make around fresh produce, around ultra-processed. But ultimately, the aim of the petitioner is to provide our children with healthier options at school. And I honestly think the Scottish Government has missed the point on this. That said, I also feel that both local authorities and those that provide school meals should be considered, data gathered. However, I struggle to see how it's possible for us to do that. And perhaps more worryingly, were we to keep the petition open, given the statement of the petition to ban ultra-processed foods in school meals, we might end up with those other, whether it's food service providers or local authorities, mimicking the Scottish Government and go down the definition route rather than ultimately try and help our children have the healthiest possible start that they can during school time. And therefore, unfortunately, I think that the petitioner's aims would be best served by closing the petition under Rule 15.7 of the Standing Orders, and for the petitioner to look again, and perhaps with something that is a petition that's more focused around healthier options, perhaps, you know, not in the petition summary focusing on terms, whether that be ultra-processed or otherwise, in order to let the new committee in the new session of Parliament really look into this in some detail.
Thank you. Yeah, I mean, I actually think that the government response is almost a roadmap of what to avoid saying and what to say instead if you're going to lodge a fresh petition. to navigate around what I thought was a Jobsworth's response as to how you define whether something is fresh or frozen. I mean, it's never been in doubt to me that if I eat something that's frozen, it's not fresh. Yeah. It's frozen. I mean, it seems nuts to me. Well, maybe not nuts. We don't want to introduce another term that the government Jobsworths might find difficult to accommodate. So my view is that if we do close this petition, there's a big issue here, and I think that it needs some careful drafting to allow the substantive issue to be addressed without this playing at games response, which I think we all find deeply unsatisfactory. But in the meantime, Mr. Torrance?
Convener, I'm just wondering if the committee could consider passing it on to the Health and Sport Committee, because they are doing food standard stuff just now.
I genuinely think it would be better with a fresh petition, because I think the trouble is the government has diminished the terms that are here. And fair enough, if you want to be pedantic, you can ignore the substance of the petition by hanging around the definition of a particular word. But, I'd love whoever submitted the response to us. I'd love to cater for them. I would give them a wholly frozen meal and tell them it was fresh. Are we agreed?
Agreed.
Petition number 2178, introduce mandatory latex labelling for food products sold in Scotland. The next continued petition has been lodged by Hazel Margaret McIver. The petition calls on the Scottish Parliament to urge the Scottish Government to introduce a mandatory latex labelling on food products sold in Scotland if there is a chance of contamination. I was actually unaware of this issue until we considered the petition on the 12th of November 2025, and we agreed at that point to write to the Scottish Government. The response states that Food Standards Scotland intends to explore what scope there may be to include statements or warnings about non-food allergens on packaging under general consumer protection law. Officials within Food Standards Scotland will discuss options for packaging-based consumer protection measures with their counterparts in the UK Government and highlight the points raised in this petition. So, I think the government seemed to have taken the issue more seriously as well in response to what we've got to say. Do colleagues have any suggestions as to how we proceed? Mr. Torrance?
Thank you, Convener. In light of evidence before us and the government taking on board the petition, I wonder if we can close the petition on the basis of food standards. Oh God, I'm even on the wrong one now. So apologies. Food Standards Scotland intends to explore the scope there may be to include statements or warnings about non-food allergens on packaging, and will discuss options for packaging based on consumer protection measures with our counterparts in the UK Government, and will highlight the points raised in the petition. Can I say to the petitioner, if this does not come forward and there's no progress in it, if we could bring a new petition back to the Petitions Committee in the new session of Parliament?
I mean, I think were it not for the time that the Parliament, the stage the Parliament's at, this is a petition we would have held open a little bit longer to see whether that progress was made. Yeah. Actually, it's one of the shortest recognitions of a petition and action being initiated. I mean, we only considered this in November. The government have taken the issue seriously. And are taking it forward, because I think it was certainly something I hadn't been aware of previously. So for those reasons, I think we close it. But again, the proof of the pudding is going to be in the eating. Something is supposed to be happening, it either will or it won't. And if it doesn't, then I think the next Parliament would have the opportunity to take this more seriously and over a longer period of time. Mr. Ewing?
Yes, I agree with that as well. I think it should be closed, but I think it has been quite a swift response in comparison with others, and that's to be welcomed. I mean, the response was the Food Standards Scotland will discuss options for packaging-based consumer protection measures, which of course is reserved with the UK Government. So, obviously the petitioner can quite legitimately write to the Chief Executive of Food Standards Scotland at any time and say, well, what is the outcome of those discussions? And if that doesn't really lead anywhere, and if the petitioner remains dissatisfied, then she can point to the fact that this was supposed to happen according to the Scottish Government, but it hasn't led anywhere. So I think there's an obvious route for the petitioner ad interim to pursue this if she is so inclined, if she so wishes to do so. But I thank her for bringing this issue, because it does affect between 1 and 6% of the population, and I know in my own family there is latex allergy, so it is quite a serious thing for those people that have it, and it's not something which has really registered very much on the radar, I think, up till now. So it's good that the petitioner has allowed this focus to be brought to it.
Okay, so we agree? Yeah. Fine. But let's see, I hope to, we'll see what happens. Petition number 2185 to introduce stronger safeguards around the use of digital material in court proceedings. And this has been lodged by Christopher Simpson. The petition calls on the Scottish Parliament to urge the Scottish Government to amend the Criminal Procedure Scotland Act of 95 to ensure that any digital material presented in court, such as photos or screenshots, is verifiably sourced, time-stamped and able to be independently authenticated before being considered admissible, unless both parties agree otherwise. And we last considered this petition on the 26th of November 2025, and we agreed to write the Lord Advocate and to the Chief Constable of Police Scotland. Now, the Lord Advocate's response explains that prosecutors must be satisfied that any evidence, whether digital or otherwise, is both credible and reliable. The Lord Advocate reiterates that the provenance of any evidence must be established and that the authenticity and accuracy of evidence can be challenged by any party. In addition to this, the Chief Constable's response states that where concerns regarding the authenticity of digital evidence are raised in the course of police investigation into a reported crime, those allegations should be treated seriously and investigated appropriately by Police Scotland. Now, the petitioner refers to his own experience to highlight that, in practice, things do not always work as the other submissions suggest they should. He expresses ongoing concerns regarding current frameworks, assuming that digital evidence is authentic at the point it is presented, and regarded the lack of a mechanism to address the harm caused to the person reported to the police on the basis of fabricated digital evidence. Well, I mean, I thought some of the issues in this struck me as being of real interest when we first considered the matter. I suppose we've got some response, but I mean, if I was in the position, I don't know how terribly reassured I'd be. But I don't know what to. I'm unclear what to do with this one.
Convener, in light of the time the committee's got, I think it would be beneficial for us to close the petition down under Rule 15.7 of Standing Orders, and that would allow the petitioner to bring a fresh petition straight back to Parliament for the next session.
What, on the basis that it would be updated to just reflect on the evidence we've got so far, rather than have us on a repeating cycle in relation to that? Yep. I don't know, Mr. Ewing?
Yes, I mean, I think the whole issue of digital evidence is one where the legal system has fallen behind technological advancement, and that the petitioner, in the particular ask of the petition is that digital material should be capable of being independently authenticated. That is an eminently sensible and indeed I would have thought necessary part of any evidence, that it can be authenticated as genuine and not manufactured or otherwise inaccurate or wrong. So I think the petitioner's ask is in principle correct, but in practice I think what it requires perhaps is for there to be, perhaps by the Lord President, rules of court brought forward which would analyse the role of digital evidence, in what circumstances it would normally be expected to be applicable, in what format it should be provided, how it can be authenticated, so that there is an open, clear set of rules and guidelines and regulations. So it may be that in closing the petition, if the petitioner reflects on this, and I think the petitioner did make a supplementary submission to us just in the last couple of days, that although I think the original ask was perfectly sensible, he may wish in a further petition, as Mr Torrance has said, to open it up a bit and extend it to a more comprehensive ask than simply the one which is set out in the petition. So I'm just trying to set out this possible course of action in case it is of interest to the petitioner, although I respect that in his own particular case he's gone through a nightmarish experience, including leading to his entertaining suicidal thoughts, he said at one stage in his submission. And so there we are.
Of either keeping this open on the basis that the next committee could further explore the issues arising, but on the back of responses in relation to part of the petition, or recommending that a fresh petition be brought, focusing on the areas and potentially the wider issue of digital evidence, which I think might be of interest to a fresh committee to explore. So I'm kind of between a rock and a hard place. Mr. Russell?
This is a much bigger, as Fergus had said, this is a much bigger issue. You know, it's widespread. You've got things like the BBC altering digital material. You know, when you've got organisations like that who are, you know, supposed to be above reproach, altering digital material. I think the Donald Trump thing was just, it came to mind there. But it's widespread. It's, I think it's probably a bigger issue than, you know, this committee can maybe. I think it needs a full look at this. You know, it's almost like a review.
So, what do we think the best course is?
Well, I do think actually that even the petitioner himself, for example, in his submission of 10th of February, refers to the lack of a guarantee that concerns about digital evidence will be examined, addressed or learned from. So he's going beyond the request for authentication, but asking for a more comprehensive set of rules and regulations by the Lord President, possibly, or by somebody else if I've got that procedurally wrong. So I think the petitioner himself is now, if in effect in subsequent submissions, asking to extend, amplify and expand on his original ask. Now, I mean, I think we're probably all a bit hesitant about asking petitioners to do more work because they've done so much work already. But I do get the impression this petitioner is not afraid of spending time in advancing his case and has been a frequent a respondent to us since the petition was lodged. So I imagine that the petitioner may be happy to do that, and I would certainly encourage him to do so. And I think that would be better, actually, than just restricting it to the original ask of the petition. I think it would be better if the new committee had a much wider remit, and I think this discussion has perhaps teased that out, that what is needed, in fact, is something really pretty comprehensive. It may be I'm being unfair to the courts and tribunal services. I have no wish to do so because I don't claim to be an expert in this. None of us come here as experts in this matter, but as a voice from petitioners. And it may be they've done work of which I'm unaware, and if that's the case, then I would apologise to them. But on the other hand, it doesn't look that way to me at the moment, and so I would suggest that we thank the petitioner. He's really brought a focus on a very, very important area, because more and more cases are going to be determined in digital evidence as digital technology supersedes previous forms of communication and information gathering. So
I think the balance then is of view that we should close the petition for the reasons Mr Torrance said. I think the petitioner is with us, but notwithstanding that, I would think in writing to the petitioner and closing the petition, we should highlight the issues that we've addressed as being something that we think might be very useful in the lodging of a fresh petition that the next Parliament could explore in a little bit more detail. Are we agreed? Yes. We are. Petition number 2188 to extend the National Entitlement Card Scheme to include ferry travel for people aged 60 and over, lodged by Claire Sparrow. This was last just considered on the 26th of November. And we agreed to write to the Cabinet Secretary for Transport. The Cabinet Secretary's response states that the Scottish Government provides significant funding to keep ferry fares low for everyone, including over 60s. Islander fares and funding of local authority ferries are also designed to allow frequent travel at a lower cost for the day-to-day needs of islanders. The response highlights that eligible residents of Orkney's outer-lying islands receive 24 free journeys per year for travel to mainland Orkney, and in Shetland, older and disabled island residents receive free or discounted inter-island ferry travel. The Cabinet Secretary states that the Scottish Government looked closely at ferry fares as part of the Fair Fares Review and the Islands Connectivity Plan. On 2nd of May 25, the Scottish Government published its strategic approach document, which confirmed that concessionary ferry travel will only be extended to under 22-year-olds. The Cabinet Secretary states that she understands the calls to include over 60s, but within current budgets, the Government is not able to expand the concessions further at this time. Do we have any suggestions as to how we might proceed, Mr Torrance?
Thank you, Convener. In light of the Government's response, which was pretty strong, I wonder if the committee would consider closing the petition under Rule 15.7 of Standing Orders on the basis that the final Islands Connectivity Plan strategy approach was published in May and did not include concessionary ferry travel for over 60s. The Scottish Government does not believe it is affordable to expand ferry concessions to over 60s. And the Scottish Government has been clear that it is not planning to take any further action in this area.
Thank you, Mr Torrance. Are we content? And our final petition this morning, petition number 2196, to address early sexual offending in Scotland, lodged by Leanne Kelly on behalf of Root the Rot. The petition calls on the Scottish Parliament to urge the Scottish Government to act on early sexual offending in young people and prevent future offending by taking tougher action on gateway offences such as unsolicited sexual images and peer assaults, educating young people about consent and online harms at school, creating a culture of parental accountability, introducing a youth monitoring register for offences committed by young people, providing real support for victims of all sexual offences. We last considered this petition on the 14th of January. We agreed to write to the Scottish Government, the Lord Advocate. The Scottish Government's response highlights a number of programmes and sets out the evaluation and review of work in this area. Examples include the Mentors in Violence Prevention programme, which undertakes an annual survey to assess its impact in schools. The submission also highlights a campaign to educate young people and adults around sextortion. Crime Stoppers produced a report which found very positive engagement with the campaign. The Scottish Government's response notes that it is consulting on new offences relating to the creation of deepfake intimate images. The Lord Advocate's response to the petition states that online sexual offences are already capable of prosecution under existing legislation. Her response notes that while the development of wider policy measures lies with the Scottish Government and Parliament, the Crown Office and Procurator Fiscal Service will continue to contribute evidence and expertise to inform any future reforms. The petitioner has provided a written submission which highlights that harmful sexual behaviour most commonly emerges in early to mid-adolescence, typically age 14. She argues that this represents a critical prevention window. The submission highlights her personal experience with this issue and states that responses to non-contact sexual harm are often to minimise the event. The petitioner questions whether annual blocks of school education on relationships, sexual health and parenthood are sufficient. She argues that prevention requires clarity, consistency and repetition proportionate to the scale of the harm. Suggestions? Mr Torrance.
Thank you, Convener. I wonder if the committee would consider closing the petition under Rule 15.1 of Standing Orders on the basis that the Scottish Government has highlighted a range of measures and programmes already in place which addresses the main aims of the petition. And the limited time left in the current parliamentary session means that the committee is unable to pursue further meaningful action on the petition. In closing the petition, the committee could highlight to the petitioner the option to submit a new petition in the next parliamentary session should she consider that insufficient action is being taken on this matter.
And I think that's the correct course of action. It's a big subject and it would need much more exploration than we can bring to it. Are we content? Yes. We are. And that concludes our meeting today. Our next meeting will take place on Wednesday, the 11th of March. I thank everyone and the petitioners and all those who have been following our proceedings and formally close the meeting.